Okay, so as Tracy, you know, where I'm coming from is that I'm passionate about making sure everybody has the knowledge and understanding that they need about themselves and about their body to make the right choices for them in menopause, in perimenopause, and so that they understand what is happening to them, and ideally that they understand that before it happens, so that they can identify and understand their own bodies and identify the signs and things, and make informed choices of what to do next. I'm a passionate advocate for the idea that how we think about something affects how we experience something. You know, we all know, or most of us know, those of us certainly, you know, done science experiments at GCSE science, know about the placebo effect. There's this wonderful experiment that you can do with teenagers whereby you have a whole load of drinks of Coke. Some of them have caffeine in, some of them haven't, but they don't know which ones. And you'll find that some kids go really, really silly and have been nowhere near caffeine, but they're absolutely convinced that they've drunk caffeine, and the caffeine has had a really giddy effect on them. It's raised their heart rate. It's, you know, it's done all of those things that you might expect a stimulant to do. And that introduces them to the idea of the placebo effect. And certainly a lot of medications, one of the big things on it, you know, you can, when you do trials, you can give people something that you say is the same thing, and it can have just as much effect as the other thing sometimes, just because they believe it can. So in that way, if we believe that we're going to have a positive experience of perimenopause, we are far more likely to have a positive experience of perimenopause. If we believe that perimenopause isn't the end of the world, but it's the start of a new opportunity, it's the dawn of our third period of life, our second spring, then we're going to go into that experience and go through that experience with a view that it's a gateway, like we look at puberty as a gateway to adulthood. You know, menopause is a gateway to this incredible future whereby, you know, we're no longer slave to a monthly hormonal cycle. We're no longer slave to that hormone that says you must put everybody else before you. You must nurture everybody else and forget about nurturing you, or to the detriment of you. And we have this freedom. But along with that comes a whole range of caveats, which is the more stressed we are, the more difficult we will find things. And the more we don't take care of ourselves and our psychological health and our physical health, the more likely we are to suffer with perimenopause. So that's where my drive to educate everybody in this whole idea that we have control of our bodies in so many ways, and we can work with. And I don't advocate one thing or another. I'm not a strong proponent that says you must take HRT, nor am I a strong person that says you mustn't take HRT. Because everybody is different. Each and every one of us is different. And therefore, we need to look at ourselves as individuals and make the right choices for us. As a scientist, I love searching for information, but I have this beautiful view of the way I look at information, which is I don't necessarily trust it, because I need it to prove itself, if you like. I need to see where the evidence for that suggestion or that suggestion is. And so much of what you read about menopause is prejudging something. It's coming from a point of view that says, I'm going to prove to you that this is right. Well, I know that if I want to, I could prove that up was down. I just had to have the right experiment and it would work, and I'd show you the right results and ignore the ones that didn't work. So I have to search. And this is what led me to looking at Vikram's posts on LinkedIn. Because what Vikram does beautifully is go, this is the research we're doing. Here's some interesting stuff to look at. And I would go, oh, good, I'm going to have a look at that. And so I connected with you, which is why you're here, isn't it? Because the fact that you're looking at these things and you're looking for the evidence is fabulous, because that's what supports me and everything to get in. Okay, that's somebody else messaging me that can't get in. So, Vikram, while you introduce yourself, I'm going to let get to the person in, if that's okay. Thank you.
That's completely fine, Jane. So thank you, first of all, for having me today. Great to see Tracy, Amanda, and whoever is on Facebook and is trying to still get in. You will be with us shortly.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me for the reason that it's going to be very informal. It's about questions, about discussing your experiences, my experiences in the clinic, for example. I'm a
Yes.
menopause specialist. I work at UCLH Hospital, which is my main NHS clinic. I do a little bit of private work on Harley Street, but the rest of my time is about UCL, women's health, where I do a bit of research. So altogether, that's where I work in terms of menopause. And since COVID, we've been more and more involved in talking about menopause on various forums, whether it's webinars, whether it's meetings, conferences, whether it's doing teaching sessions for GPs or other health professionals or for public. So it's a great platform to have either Zoom or Teams meeting to try and disseminate the message that no two people will have the same menopause journey. Everybody will have a different experience. Everybody doesn't need a medical intervention. Some women do need interventions, and there's a place for it. When it works well, but it should be done in the proper way for proper reasons. So I think today is mainly about listening to your experiences. If you have questions, if you want to ask me anything about what is the general way menopause happens or what are the experiences women share in the clinic, I'm happy to discuss anything, but I'll go by what each of you want to get out of this meeting, really.
I've got one question. I'm just going to let Naomi know. I've just been looking on Facebook, and I've got one question that's come in, which is, does HRT have any long-term effects on the brain?
Okay, so we'll start the other way around then. We'll start with the HRT and come back to menopause. So it's a good question because it's actually a question that doesn't have a straightforward answer. So let's look at what menopause does to the brain. So we know whatever research we've done so far, what we know is as a woman will go through from, say, having regular periods to perimenopause when estrogen levels will fall, cycles will become irregular, periods will become irregular. And then, of course, menopause will happen when the periods will stop altogether and there will be very, very low levels of estrogen in the body. Also remember that while estrogen is disappearing, there's another hormone, which is the progesterone, which usually happens every cycle, every month before period, is also disappearing. So there are two hormones effectively disappearing. And the third hormone, which is the testosterone, is getting low but slowly. And the reason being, testosterone is not just produced by the ovaries, it is also produced by adrenal gland, which is sitting on top of the kidneys. So although in menopause, the estrogen progesterone disappear quickly within 5 years or so, the testosterone won't do that. It's going to be very, very slowly declining 1% or 2%, right from 30s on to 50s and 60s. The brain tends to sense this. So as a woman will go through perimenopause, menopause, some women will start noticing symptoms. What symptoms? Such as the brain fogging, not being able to retain information, forgetting a word, forgetting a person's name, not being able to be as sharp as they were in meetings, having that lack of confidence, concentration. That's because they can't do this job in the same way that they did 5 years ago, for example. Coming to a room, forgetting why you're there. And those sort of cognitive deficits will appear. And right through from perimenopause to postmenopause, for the first 5 years or so, these will be very prominent. That's your brain sensing that the hormones are changing, the estrogen progesterone is dropping. If you look at the imaging during this time, the brain does change its blood supply. So the part of the brain that's active, say in 40s, in early perimenopause, and then menopause in 50s will change. So the blood supply to different parts of the brain is altered. So by the time a woman has then gone to postmenopause, so all those sort of fluctuations are done, and it's into menopause, the brain circulation reestablishes a new circuit. and it looks like women have got used to the effects of lack of hormone. And many women will report, actually, those cognitive deficits I was having have improved. I don't have that brain fogging. It was massive during the transition, but actually now things seems to have stabilized.
Yeah.
The brain fogging is less, the cognitive defect is less. Some women, however, will not have this luck, and they will continue to experience the brain fogging and the cognitive effects. What we don't know is who will have persisting symptoms and who will be the person who will actually go through that transition and then stabilize. So most of those cognitive symptoms have gone and the brain has readjusted itself. That is what you see on the MRI imaging in some of the biggest papers on this.
So my question there is really around stress as well, because my personal experience is that when my stress was at its highest, then that was when I was really suffering brain fog. And my brain fog hit in a big way after I'd actually gone through the menopause. So it was at that time when you can say 12 months of no periods, therefore menopause. At that period, I think that's when I really started to notice also that I was struggling with my brain. And what was really amazing was taking that stress away. I remember actually saying to people around me, I can think again. It's wonderful. And my brain connected back to my body. My brain connected back to me, and I found it again. And I've read studies that have looked at this, that have talked a lot about the idea that stress is a big part of the picture in terms of whether the brain can adapt or not.
So the statement is true, but we haven't validated it yet. So
Okay,
stress, for example, psychological stress or physical stress because of physical medical conditions,
yes, yeah,
or medications, for example, which can alter brain function. All of those could be stressors which may precipitate symptoms of menopause, which may make them worse. And you could argue that for some women, it will not be the lack of hormones. It will simply be what is going on in their life, their stress, their physical health, their medications, their psychological triggers, which will actually be having much more cognitive influence on the symptoms as compared to their lack of hormones
but
during
doesn't
menopause.
Stress also affect the level of hormones, the estrogen, progesterone? Doesn't it have an impact on those as well in that period of time when you're
not
kind of
directly,
readjusting?
it will be indirectly affecting hormones. So stress, for example, may not directly affect your estradiol level or your progesterone level. It will indirectly be affecting hormones like cortisol, insulin, thyroid, and others. The way indirectly it can have some impact on estrogen is stress can often shut down your hypothalamus pituitary axis. And that may mean that the brain is not giving enough FSH, LH, this hormone signals that it gives to ovary to produce more estrogen, and that may shut down. So stress may indirectly affect ovarian hormones, but it certainly will affect cortisol and insulin.
Yeah. Just admitting somebody else as well. So we've got a few people now.
To answer your first question, so this is what happens in a natural menopause. As your hormones decline, your brain gives you some symptoms, and then they tend to settle post-menopause. If you have persisting symptoms, or if your symptoms are at a level where it interferes with your day-to-day functioning, that's when HRT may help relieve those symptoms. So you will have to address it holistically. You will have to look for any stressors in your life, physical, psychological stressors, how much you work, your work-life balance, you're eating healthy, you're exercising, you're giving yourself break with mindfulness or meditation. All that together will be one holistic aspect of looking at reducing your cognitive symptom, and also, of course, not smoking, not having too much alcohol. And then if there are still symptoms, HRT will help with the cognitive symptoms. If they've been part of this menopause, how long you do it and how much you take will, of course, vary from person to person. So that's different, but the HRT will help with symptom. As regards to long-term effect of HRT, whether it prevents dementia, prevents cognitive decline in later life, or it actually causes dementia, there have been so much noise in the media. We don't have any scientific proof for that. We have just some observational studies which may say there is an increased risk of dementia with certain old forms of HRT, or there is some paper saying there's observational data or animal data that it may help some groups of women against dementia, protect them. But for the wider range of everyone, population, everyone who is out and about doing their day-to-day life, we don't have human trials, so we can't say HRT prevents or causes dementia either.
And from conversations, I think it was with you as well, that any of these studies aren't long-term enough either.
Yes,
Is that
short-term,
correct? Yeah.
certain typical forms of HRT, which we don't usually use in the modern times.
Yeah. So those things out in the news that are saying, go and get HRT, it'll stop you getting dementia, are really quite scary in a sense, because brain fog is one of the scariest symptoms of perimenopause. Losing that connection to your brain. I mean, I know for me, it was horrendous. You know, I felt like I'd lost myself because I couldn't communicate with my brain. It just wasn't working. So the idea that the idea that then somebody can say to me, look, we know that this is a magic pill, take this and all of that is going away. Now my mom has dementia as well, you know, so there's two things that's preying on. And I you know, if I wasn't a scientist, if I wasn't looking at this thing going, well, tell me how you know, where's the evidence, how certain are you of this, if I wasn't asking those questions, you know, I could quite easily be conned in a way, and I know it's well-meaning conning, but it's still conning, that the only way to protect myself was to take HRT. And I think that message is one I'm very clear I don't give. I don't say don't, but I don't say do. And I think that's really important. And there are people out there who say both, one or the other. So this is why you have to be careful with the messaging, because some people you listen to will be all HRT, 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 and others will be, oh no, got to be natural, can't do HRT. And we're all different. So therefore we all need different solutions. I think just want to check if there's a questions coming from this group. There is another question coming in also in the Facebook group, but it's linked to the one to the same person. So I'd like to give other people an opportunity first. And we've got a comment as well in the comment. So does anybody want to ask a question in the group or want to say something? You trying to talk with Naomi?
Hiya, can I ask something in a minute as well?
Of course,
yeah.
Yeah.
I can't see how to add the messages on. It normally comes up on the side, but it's not doing it on here. So
you've got sound on now. We can hear you now, so that's good.
Yeah, I turned it off while kids were coming down getting ready for football. But,
yeah, no worries.
no, I've just started on progesterone only pill to try and help with heavy periods, but I don't know whether estrogen would be a good idea to be taking that as well. I'm not sure, but
so if you're asking me that as a question, it depends on what your symptoms are. So progesterone only pill is a treatment for heavy menstrual bleeding.
Yeah.
And it's been prescribed to you for managing the periods. That is not HRT. That's not hormone replacement therapy.
Right. Okay.
So
I thought that was a part hormone.
Yeah, you can use POP as part of it, but it will be for the indication for menopausal symptoms.
Okay.
So if let's say you are having lots of symptoms which are getting your quality of life down, lots of hot flashes, night sweats, or sleep issues, and vaginal dryness or bladder issues, different symptoms. There are many of them. If you got those and then it comes to a point where you feel this is really getting me down, I cannot continue like this. I've tried the different lifestyle measures and others, but you want a relief from those menopausal symptoms, then of course your GP could add estrogen, make sure your progesterone is changed to something that's better for HRT. And then you could take both those, making sure that your bleeds are not heavy, because HRT can give you bleeding. If you've already got heavy periods, then you need to be careful about the combination so it doesn't get you too much heavy bleeding.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Tracy, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, with all the women you sort of spoken to about going through their menopause, do any of them say that they had a very similar journey to their mums? Is there any link? Because my daughter's body has become more and more like mine as she's got older. And I just wondered if there's any way I could point her in any direction as she gets older, because my mum never spoke to me about menopause. And I'm just wondering if there's anything, if she's likely to have very similar symptoms to me, or is it going to be very, very different? Because I have celiac disease and she's developed it, my daughter's developed it later on as a late teenager. And I just wondered if that means her body type is probably a lot more like mine. Is she likely to experience what I've experienced? Because I did sort of lose my marbles quite a bit and it was very scary.
So in terms of age and when the menopause happens, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that she will probably have menopause at the same age as you, give and take 1 or 2 years.
Right.
So there's a good correlation between mom's age at menopause and the daughter's age. In terms of how she will manifest, like symptoms and what sort of presentation she has, what sort of experience she will have, that's very different, simply because her lifestyle or her life experiences may be different to yours. We often find that there is some degree of similarity, and that's because you've kind of had the same pool of genes, more or less same pool of cells in the body, same sort of hormones. And so therefore there's some similarity in the experience, but it's not that she will not have some symptoms which you did not have. She may have a unique set of symptoms, or as she goes through her bones and heart may have slightly different response to lack of hormone. So quite individual in that sense.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
On that note,
yeah,
so, sorry.
Carry on.
So my mum and my sister both had to have hysterectomies because of heavy periods. So it's only recently become very heavy for me, and I wonder if am I genetically likely to have a hysterectomy as well because they both had to? Is that likely to be the case or not?
No, so you could decide what sort of management you may want to have for heavy periods. At the time that we're talking now, there are so many medical options for managing heavy periods, like ablation and a few others, where you don't have to have a hysterectomy. But at the time that they would have had their treatment, hysterectomy was probably the only surgery, very little medical option. So you might have to talk to your GP or gynecologist to say, what options do you have? Can you preserve your uterus until you go into menopause? Because once you hit menopause, you will probably stop bleeding completely and you may not have any surgery. On the other hand, they might have exhausted all the medical options and then you still bleed. They might still offer you hysterectomy. I don't think
never knowing, isn't it, when it's going to stop. So yeah.
Well, generally
the gamble.
It's a bit of a gamble. So general average age for Caucasian women is 51 plus minus
51.
51. So that's usually the average age. Some will have it anytime between 45 to 51. Few will have it between 51 to 55, but by 55, majority would have stopped. So that's the rough timing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I was 56, so I just like being different. I think the other interesting thing on that one actually is very interesting because my mum had a hysterectomy at around about 52. And so a lot of the things that she then suffered came after the hysterectomy. So after her hysterectomy, she developed really high blood pressure, uncontrollable high blood pressure. And I think that's one of the reasons why she's probably got Alzheimer's. But what I noticed was as I started hitting perimenopause, my blood pressure went up. And during pregnancy, my blood pressure was high. And my daughter's blood pressure was high during pregnancy. So there's clearly a link that I'm seeing in my own body and my family's body between hormones and blood pressure. And I'm wondering whether there are things that my daughter can do going forwards that will protect her from that same journey that my mum went on and I went on. Now, my sister's had ablation, so I didn't inherit the problem with needing her hysterectomy. So I was lucky there. I did go through a period of time where I had very light periods and then a period of time when they were really heavy and then they'd alternate, but eventually they stopped. And I then realized that they'd stopped for 12 months or more, which was lovely. But yeah, the question I've got is what is the information and evidence out there linking blood pressure and changes in blood pressure to hormones? Because as I say, I have a history of that, both me and familially as well.
So there is a body of evidence that links how sensitive you can be with your blood pressure and hormones. So some women will have sensitive blood vessel walls. sensitive hearts. So the moment perimenopause or menopause happens, the estrogen is no longer there. And estrogen is the one that keeps the blood vessels walls healthy. So the moment it disappears, the wall vessels start becoming a bit stiff. And the moment they become stiff, that indirectly has some impact on the heart. And overall, that means that the heart has to pump more and more forcefully, and that drives your blood pressure up.
Yeah.
So women in perimenopause and menopause will always be having a slightly higher risk of developing high blood pressure when the estrogen protective effect goes away.
Yeah.
But it'll be similar, or it'll be the same women who in pregnancy may have also experienced the blood pressure issues. That's because their vessels are a bit more sensitive to changes in hormone. So they get it first during the pregnancy, then again that repeats once the hormones fluctuate in perimenopause and then menopause.
So that's a really good conversation for me to have with my daughter then, that says, look, you had blood pressure issues in pregnancy. I did. I've now got blood pressure issues post-menopause and during perimenopause. My mum did. It's highly likely that you will need to do that. So look at what, because lifestyle, you know, I was doing a lot of the lifestyle things right, but I wasn't doing the stress right. So obviously, you know, what I was getting in terms of because of the nature of my job, it was just impossible. So the things I was getting was that whole thing around reduce your stress. And I was thinking, how? But there were things I just didn't believe there were. We've got a couple of things that have come up in the chat as well, Vikram. One around HRT and weight gain. So what's the body of evidence out there on that?
So the comment says, I found HRT caused issues with weight gain, which was counterproductive. So we have lots of research done now on HRT and weight gain, and none of the scientific research shows that you gain weight with HRT. So giving estrogen, progesterone, testosterone to somebody will not increase their weight. And there's enough scientific studies to show that. Now, what happens though, is when you start HRT, in the first 6 months to 12 months, you can have lots of water retention. And the water retention is a natural effect of many hormones, whether it's estrogen or progesterone. They will always give you a bit of fluid retention, water weight will increase, and it may increase your weight by 2 to 3 kilograms. You might find your fingers are a bit more swollen. Your ankles may have swelling. You might find the dresses are not so comfortable to fit. And that's usually the first, generally 3 to 6 months, but can go on up to 12 months. At a point, then body gets used to this. It recognizes the extra water weight. And you find that if you continue using the HRT, you will get rid of that extra fluid after 6 months or so. So you will go back to your previous baseline weight before you started using the HRT. Some women have a similar effect with the contraceptive pill as well. They tend to feel a bit bloated, feel a bit swollen when they start using the pill. And gradually over years, you tend to throw the excess water out. So if you've had that effect, it was probably temporary and would have disappeared after a few months. So if you wish to go back to HRT, you can. But remember, the weight gain is a problem of menopause on its own without HRT.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
After 50, the metabolism slows down. The insulin is not functioning as before. The hormones such as estrogen and thyroid are slowing down, which are metabolically very active hormones. And that means you have to work extra hard with the same amount of what you eat before. You have to put in extra effort with physical activity and other forms of exercise to try and get that extra weight from accumulating. And that's a reality for everyone.
So talking about that, and I'm curious, really, you know, these things changing and how they change. The body has been designed over, you know, thousands of years, hasn't it? You know, we've evolved over that period of time, and we've evolved to go through menopause. So I'm just wondering what the beneficial side of this slowing down is supposed to be for the body.
It's difficult to say. So if you look at the books which have been written, the research that has gone into knowing why menopause happens, what's the advantage of that whole process of stopping having the hormones and then actually not having periods. And overall, if you look at that whole evolution process from animal species and then coming up to humans, because very few species have menopause.
No, but orcas do, for example, don't they?
That's right. That's right. The
Yeah.
giraffes, the orcas, the belugas, few of them who have the menopause. It looks like the slowing is done on a purpose so that the most mature female member of that species or that clan will lead the others who are more energetic, more adrenaline driven.
Yeah.
And so it's like somebody guiding the rest of the pack or rest of the society who's slowed down with the purpose in a form of more mature form. That said, we don't know physically why these things happen. Why does insulin slow down? Why does that fat accumulation around the tummy happen? Why is it that you can eat a little, but it's difficult to then lose the weight that comes with it? Why, in evolutionary terms, that slowing of metabolism, there must be some benefit to it. There is no doubt. Nature doesn't think so.
Absolutely.
But we haven't got to the point where research can say this is why it happens, and actually how can we get around it without having to use hormones or with HRT. We haven't figured it out.
But also there's a question there, isn't there, in that should we get around it? You know, if it's designed, you know, as part of our design system, is it more to do with our modern way of life? You know, it's like modern way of life creates more stress, which relates to more illnesses and things like that, isn't it? I wonder if it's elements of our modern way of life that are at a friction with this whole process of menopause, and if there's, rather than a way around it, a way of working with it, I would say it's a better language, perhaps.
If you ask me the question, should we kind of get around it? The answer would be yes, only because of the long-term health risk. Is that something in our lifestyle around menopause, as the metabolism slows down, and if you start gaining weight, you start having your blood pressure going high, you're then increasing risks of, say, heart disease,
risks. Absolutely.
Risk of stroke, increasing risk of cancers. Can we make sure that our lifestyle then adjusts to that slowing of metabolism? Can we cut out stress? Can we achieve a work-life balance? Can we get the mind rest? Can we get good healthy food and exercise enough to counteract that slow metabolism? Those are the questions which all of us battle with in our day-to-day life.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what it all boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, just going back to the adipose fat around the middle as well, I read somewhere that part of the reason that it can build up more is linked again to high levels of stress. And that adipose fat being another source of estrogen in some way. Am I right in thinking that?
So again, people do claim, they give these explanations, but it's never been validated. So
okay, that's what I wanted to ask.
So when it's been asked is, okay, you get tummy fat, and nature has designed this so that you get another source of estrogen when the ovaries have retired and they're not giving you estrogen. The tummy fat gives you estrogen, but actually clinically, that amount of estrogen from the adipose tissue is never enough, neither for symptoms nor for heart.
Yeah.
So it looks like it was not designed to be that way. That's a side effect of the modern lifestyle that we have, and we're not taking enough precaution for the fat building up. That will be my sort of explanation. But neither my nor the other way has been proven. Yeah. That's why we need good research to know what exactly does happen. Why is that adipose tissue deposited there? What levels of estriol does it give? And does it have any significant effect for any part of the body? We haven't answered these questions, to be honest.
But they're good questions to ask, aren't they? I think, you know, they're interesting questions to try and find out the answers to. The person who said they had another question hasn't actually come up with another question. They asked if they could ask a question, but I haven't seen another question. So I hope I haven't missed that. There is a question. There is a comment in the chat. Sorry, yeah. Somebody just said something. No, okay. There is a question in the chat which he says, is this thing around HRT, or rather, we were talking about hormones related to diabetes?
So the question, what is the question?
When we were talking about the changes in the hormones in our system and the impact that it has on things like our insulin resistance and things in our body, is that related is this related to diabetes and why there's an increased likelihood of diabetes?
It is.
Like, for
It is.
example, in pregnancy, high blood pressure, in gestational diabetes, does that indicate a higher risk of menopausal diabetes, for example?
So kind of a situation to explain that effect better is what happens when you have premature menopause or early menopause. So women who have premature menopause below the age of 40, or they have early menopause 41, 45, they may have had medical or surgical menopause because they have had to have treatments which damage ovaries, or ovaries need to be removed below 40. You find that they have a higher risk of diabetes. That comes because the estrogen disappears. Insulin doesn't work as well, insulin resistance builds up, and then of course clinical diabetes happens. So you see that sort of a trajectory is then happening, but at a lesser intensity when natural menopause happens. So gradually the estrogen declines. It's a very metabolically active hormone, and as it declines, it will bring down the insulin action, insulin sensitivity. The stress will increase, cortisol will go up, because of all the changes happening during menopause. So increased cortisol, less estrogen, insulin, more resistance. And if you have some genetic predisposition or any other risk factor, you'll be pushed into diabetes, which is why it's so important that diabetes is definitely linked to the changes that happen with menopause.
Okay. So are there any other comments or any things that other people want to say? Catherine, I know this was your question in the chat. Is there anything you'd like to say on that? Or anything further you'd like to ask?
No, it just seems to be that while going through menopause, I mean, I became diabetic, type 2 diabetic, some years ago, but I managed to work to get that into remission. But now going through menopause, my blood pressure's gone up and I've become diabetic again. So it's I think I'm just predisposed to those conditions genetically, and it seems that going through the menopause along with work stress just hasn't helped. So it's quite interesting to understand that these things are very, are closely linked, but we seem to get a bad rap for having high blood pressure and diabetes, but it's hard to lose weight and reverse them. But so that explains quite a few things.
And interestingly as well, talking about our sensitivity to things, the conversation I had this morning with Dr. Oliver Vikram that I was talking to you about earlier, she also talked about she's doing a little bit of research around breathing and things like that, and one of the things she's looking at is carbon dioxide sensitivity. And there seems to be some evidence that suggests that as women go through perimenopause into menopause, their ability to tolerate carbon dioxide in the blood drops. Which again, so that's why there's this kind of step change in people with breathing disorder, sleeping related breathing disorders. As we get older, it's more associated with men, we know that, but postmenopausal and menopausal women tend to be hitting into there, and numbers increase dramatically. So there seems to be an awful lot of things that our sensitivity changes dramatically. I mean, is there research out there that's showing this sort of thing? Yeah.
No. So you might have heard so much on social media about histamine sensitivity, people's allergies getting worse. Sensitivity to foods. People have tolerated foods for a number of years or decades, and they suddenly start noticing they're sensitive to wine or sensitive to some other form of food. And that's all typically suggesting that there is a change in how the immune systems, for example, react to the hormone changes. Your whole hormone milieu reacts to the changes of menopause. The blood parameters, including the carbon dioxide you're talking about, will change. The problem is we have never actually looked into any of these changes. What we have focused on so far is very basic research. What symptoms happen? Can we give HRT, alleviate them? Yeah. But the physiology, why they happen in the first place, in a laboratory, in a sort of settings of preclinical medicine, we haven't really focused on basic science. And hopefully with all this noise around menopause, that is starting to happen now.
That would be good, because I think these are all really interesting questions that pose the question around, as you were saying before, you kind of like, how can we positively impact so that we make the life for women at this period in their time, much more appropriate and reasonable, and reduce the health risks. That's because there are significant health risks, aren't there, associated with poor sleep, for example. And again, there's an increased dementia risk and a whole range of other things that go with that. There is one question come into, I thought there was, but it seems to have gone, in the Facebook. I don't know if anybody else can see it, which was...
I can't see any of the questions on my... I can't see the chat when I'm on my iPad, so I can't see any of them. But I have got a question that...
okay, yes, go ahead.
I was told that I had high triglyceride levels last year. Is that likely to be linked to menopause then? Is that anything to do with hormones?
So it may not be. You can have purely high triglyceride levels simply related to diet. If you have a genetic predisposition, the enzyme which breaks down triglycerides or forms them may be working less efficiently. It's called familial hypertriglyceridemia, which means some members in family may also have high triglycerides. So it could be genetic. It may not be linked only to menopause. But of course, menopause is one of the reasons for high LDL cholesterol and triglyceride. Premenopausally, women tend to always have better lipid profile, normal cholesterol, good HDL cholesterol, and low triglyceride. That's because of estrogen. Once menopause happens, there's no longer protective effect of estrogen. So women tend to have slight worsening of their lipids and triglyceride and LDL bad cholesterol. That's why the heart disease risk starts catching up with men. And so you may be in that transition. And if you've had menopause, it may be a contributing factor to why the triglycerides have gone up. And of course, your GP will offer you all the lifestyle intervention, diet, exercise, stress, and then statins.
Well, that is all they're offered, because I had blood tests because I was having really, really heavy, crampy legs all the time. So they sent me for blood tests, and they tested for hormone levels at the same time. And then they just sent me a text saying your triglycerides are high, and here's a link to a website about what you need to do about it. But they didn't say there could possibly be any link, because at the time I was asking whether I needed to be looking at HRT, but they didn't suggest any link or follow-up or anything. They just sent a...
Well, certainly it's linked to menopause, and you may want to go back and have a conversation with them at some point. If you're considering HRT for symptoms, it will have some benefits for your lipid profile as well.
Okay, it's useful to know. Thank you.
Amanda, I just wondered if you had anything you wanted to say or ask, because we haven't heard anything from you at the moment.
Yeah, hi everybody. I was actually going to just ask a question if there's a scientific link between thyroid and menopause at all.
So a lot of women ask that question. There's plenty on internet as to one affects the other. So if you have thyroid issue, you take thyroxine, for example, does that affect your HRT and menopause? Vice versa, if you're on HRT for menopause, does it affect how well your thyroid is controlled? If you look at robust neutral research, there is not much of a link. Hypothyroidism or low thyroid treated with thyroxine is one condition, causes similar symptoms to menopause, like feeling cold or temperature issues, the dry skin, the fatigue, the sort of brain fogging. These can happen just with thyroid. But as long as you treat appropriate doses of thyroxine, that should be taken care of. HRT, on the other hand, for menopause symptoms, similar symptoms, overlapping. But if you get the dose and the type of estrogen right, then generally the symptoms should be better. The only connection between the two is that if you take oral forms of HRT, the tablet forms of HRT, you may have to slightly increase your dose of thyroxine, because once you take oral HRT, it stimulates enzymes in the liver, which may mean that it makes proteins which bind your thyroxine. So you may have to take increased oral dose of thyroxine. But if you're on other forms of HRT like patches, gel, spray, then that doesn't hold true. That's the only connection between the two.
Okay, all right, that's brilliant. Okay, thank you. That's really useful. And just to say, I know you know, Jane, but I need to dip out in a couple of minutes.
Yeah. No worries. That's absolutely fine. I wondered actually, I mean, this has been fascinating, and there's some
Thank
really
you.
positive comments coming through, Vikram, on
Thank you.
Facebook as well, about how helpful it has been, this conversation, and how
Thank
clear you've been with your explanations as well. Somebody has actually said, a second person I can understand who talks science. So I'm the first, you're the second. so that's brilliant. I think you have made things incredibly clear and really easy to understand and connect with. Is there anything else that anybody else wants to bring or ask at this stage? If not, I think, I can bring this to a close, but it's been absolutely fascinating. Any questions from anybody? Excellent. Okay, and there's nothing coming up on Facebook either. This has been brilliant.